My personal opinion is that we have to keep geoengineering on the table. We have to look at it very carefully because we might get desperate enough to want to use it. The danger, of course, with geoengineering is the one I was referring to a moment ago. We don't understand the system well enough to predict its responses in detail, and that means there's always a danger if you try to engineer the system on a large scale that you will do something that has side effects that are worse than the dimension of the problem you're trying to cure with the geoengineering in the first place. There are a variety of schemes that have been discussed for geoengineering. A classic example is injecting reflecting particles into Earth orbit that would deflect some of the sunlight that would otherwise be warming the Earth, and in that way try to produce a cooling effect to offset the heating effect of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. Current estimates are that that would be very expensive, that it would be problematic from the standpoint of injecting things into orbit that our other orbiting space assets would have trouble with. And it doesn't solve the whole problem because, for example, it does nothing about the absorption of some of the excess carbon dioxide in the surface layer of the ocean, which is acidifying the ocean and posing a potential threat to ocean creatures that form shells or skeletons out of calcium carbonate. It also doesn't even fully address the atmospheric heat transfer effects of the greenhouse gases because essentially you're interfering in the visible part of the energy spectrum in order to offset an interference in the infrared part of the energy spectrum, and you can't expect that to be completely effective.
Plötzlich auf einem Radarschirm auf und waren ganz lange unerklärlich. Mittlerweile deutet alles darauf hin, dass ein Militärexperiment die Wolken verursacht hat. Und jetzt hat ein neues Gebilde offenbar Kurs auf NRW genommen. Was das bedeutet und welche Rolle geheimnisvolle Düppels dabei spielen, Parvis Khosravi verrät es Ihnen.
Kampfjäger der Bundeswehr manipulieren unsere Wetterkarten. Diese Vermutung von Bonner Wetterfröschen ist jetzt bestätigt. Unheimliche Geisterwolken mit einer Länge von 350 Kilometern tauchen plötzlich auf den Radarschirmen auf. Allerdings nur auf dem Wetterradar. Einmal im Sommer 2005 und einmal im März 2006. Die Bundeswehr hat mittlerweile zugegeben, dass sie im März eine Luftkampfübung über Holland machte. Für Carsten Brandt von donnerwetter.de ist klar, das ist des Rätsels Lösung.
Wir wissen heute, dass es mit 99,9%iger Sicherheit Düppel waren. Düppel bestehen aus Plastikteilchen, so etwa mit Metalldampf drauf. Die dienen dazu, militärisch Radargeräte zu täuschen. Das ist deren Hauptaufgabe. Und da wurden wohl damals bei der ersten Geisterwolke mindestens hunderte Kilo, wenn nicht Tonnen ausgesetzt, um so ein riesen künstliches Regenband zu erzeugen.
Nach den Radarbildern sind es Tonnen dieser Substanzen. Laut Bundeswehr wurden aber nur ganz geringe Mengen dieser Düppel ausgesetzt. Sie dienen der bewussten Täuschung von Radarbildern, da ihre haarfeinen Fäden Flugzeuge tarnen. Wie gefährlich sie für Menschen sind, weiß zurzeit niemand. Das Militär sagt, sie sind ungefährlich. Doch in den USA gibt es längst Proteste gegen diese Technik. Und auch hierzulande regt sich was, zum Beispiel bei den Grünen in NRW.
Hier wird offensichtlich großflächig die Umwelt verschmutzt und das auch noch mit Geheimnistuerei verbunden. Und das muss auf den Tisch. Wir werden die Landesregierung danach fragen und die soll die Bevölkerung jetzt umfassend aufklären.
Und es geht schon wieder los. Derzeit gibt es neue Luftkampfübungen über dem Hunsrück. Die Bundeswehr warnte jetzt erstmals die Wetterdienste vor verfälschten Radarbildern in den kommenden 3 Wochen.
Die Prognose von uns sagt, dass wir Südwestwind haben. Das heißt, diese Wolke wird dann über die Eifel, ins Rheinland, ins Ruhrgebiet, weiter dann hier oben bis nach Ostwestfalen, Bielefeld, Paderborn, Osnabrück, dann sogar in Niedersachsen und bei entsprechend großer Menge sogar weiter nach Niedersachsen, vielleicht sogar bis in den Hamburger Raum hineingetragen. Also es ist ein richtiger Wolkenfilm, der dann entsteht bis nach Hamburg.
Carsten Brandt hatte nach der ersten Wolke bereits Strafanzeige gegen Unbekannt wegen Wettermanipulation gestellt. Er wird sein Radar in der nächsten Zeit genau beobachten, denn jede neue Geisterwolke könnte seine Vermutung bestätigen.
Aerosol geoengineering looks like it is so cheap that the cost is basically not going to be an issue. That means that implementation decisions will be risk-to-risk decisions. The risk of doing it against the risk of not doing it. And it makes the problem of how we govern it fundamentally harder and different and novel. So I've told you that it's cheap to deliver materials to the stratosphere, and I'm convinced that's true. I don't think that will change. But I think the more we do research, the less easy this will look, the more complicated the environmental effects will look. And that's a good thing because right now it looks too easy. So I think that if we do more research, we're likely to find out that it's harder and more complicated than we thought, and that the side effects are harder to manage, and that's a healthy outcome that will make it easier to do the management. Of course, the opposite reaction is possible. It's an empirical question, how people will actually react to knowledge about this. Another reaction is to say, if these crazy scientists are so concerned about putting CO2 in the atmosphere, they want to think about these things, then that might actually mean we should be more serious about the risks of CO2 in the atmosphere. And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard, it's more like free riding on our grandkids. And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard, it's more like free riding on our grandkids.
Numerous air quality studies, including from CARB, California Air Quality Resource Board, have named submicron-sized particulates as being particularly harmful for human respiration. Through all the discussions today, I have not heard any mention of this fallout, and has this been studied, and also the effects of a highly reactive metal like aluminum on toxifying soils and waters?
The question is, what would be the effects of these materials on human health if they came down into the stratosphere, in particular small particles in aluminum?
So the collaborators of mine working on the aerosol scheme are actually folks from Carnegie Mellon who've focused on human health impacts. And while we haven't published it, that was the very first thing we did, was do the order of magnitude calculation in level pencil and paper, but with an expert on human health impacts about whether there could be an issue. And for aluminum or other particles, there are a lot of toxicological things that need to get looked at seriously. But if you're just thinking about the sheer number of particles and the human health impact of small particles, the answer is, while we haven't published it, that was the first thing we looked at with some of the leading experts who do epidemiological research on human health impacts, and it's not even close to being an issue.
Clarify, so 10 megatons of aluminum dumped into the atmosphere would have no human health impact.
So let me be more careful here. We're to separate out the toxicological, so the alumina we've only begun to research and published nothing. Alumina we've only begun to research and published nothing.
Dane looked at him and he said, so you're telling me that spraying 10 to 20 megatons of aluminum, as you said, would have no human health effects? He took a deep breath and he swallowed and he said, let me be more careful here.
We haven't done anything serious on alumina, and so there could be something terrible that we'll find tomorrow we haven't looked at it.
And that, for me, that was the whole main point of what is going to be coming out to the public. It's the damaging effects of aluminum that are being found around the world in massive amounts. Here's David Keith confronted on this very issue, and he looked, you know, at that point like they just let the cat out of the bag.
Mm-hmm. We haven't done anything serious on alumina, and so there could be something terrible that we'll find tomorrow we haven't looked at it.
The death dumps, otherwise known as chemical trails, are being dropped and sprayed throughout the United States, in England, Scotland, Ireland, Northern Europe, and I have personally seen them not only in the United States, but in Mexico and Canada. Birds are dying around the world. Fish are dying by the hundreds of thousands around the world. This is genocide. This is poison. This is murder by the United Nations. This element within our society that's doing this must be stopped. I happen to know of 2 of the locations where the airplanes are that dump this crap on us. 4 of the planes are out of the Air National Guard, Lincoln, Nebraska, and the other planes are out of Fort Still, Oklahoma. I personally have observed the planes that were standing still in Nebraska, Lincoln, Nebraska, at the Air National Guard. They have no markings on them. They're huge bomber-like airplanes with no markings. This is a crime against humanity, a crime against America, a crime against the citizens of this great country. They must be stopped. What is wrong with Congress? This has an effect on their population and their people and their friends and their relatives and themselves. What's wrong with them? What's wrong with the pilots who are flying these airplanes? They're dumping this crap, this poison, on their own families. Somebody has to do something about it. Somebody in Congress has to step forward and stop it now. Thank you. I'm Ted Gunderson.
They begin as normal contrails from a jet engine, but do not fade away like a normal contrail.
Ver incluso en las páginas de la NASA imágenes de satélite donde a veces media Europa en un solo día está siendo cruzada por aviones creando cuadrículas, y esos gases se van expandiendo hasta crear densas nubes sobre amplísimas zonas de toda Europa, insisto, que son nubes que se ve que son artificiales porque lo están creando aviones.
La primera vez que se habló de chemtrails fue en 1987. Desde entonces, investigadores independientes han elaborado distintas teorías sobre lo que se cree que es producto de la geoingeniería desarrollada a finales del siglo XX. Los gobiernos no emiten información oficial al respecto, pero tampoco refutan estas teorías.
Siempre ha habido cierto interés en la creación de nubes para beneficiar pues temas tan sensibles como la agricultura y la alimentación. Y en el sentido contrario, también ha habido intentos durante la historia más reciente, sobre todo a mediados del siglo pasado, durante la Guerra Fría, para perjudicar al enemigo creando condiciones climatológicas o meteorológicas adversas para el oponente.
Y de ahí sale la legislación de la ONU, o una legislación pequeña de la ONU, y otra legislación pequeña, ¿no?, en Estados Unidos, en el Congreso, en el año 2001, en la cual se dice que los estados que están desarrollando, que están gastando dinero y están desarrollando esta tecnología de modificación del clima, no pueden utilizarla en conflicto de guerra contra sus enemigos, pero estos estados a la vez se reservan el derecho de usar esa tecnología dentro de sus fronteras.
Everybody sees in the current year the escalation of toxins dumped from the sky. They call them death dumps. We're seeing an increase in number, and it seems to be like there's an increase in the amount of toxins that we're inhaling. Are you witnessing anything of this nature?
Very definitely. I've been watching this for the past few years, and I've noticed this in various locations in California, as well as other states, and even in Europe. Last year I was in Switzerland in May and visiting some relatives, and I was up in the high mountains, and sure enough, we had chemtrails placed all over the sky. When I spoke to my cousin about that, he said, well, I thought those were just plane exhaust from the plane. And I said, well, the gases discharged from the plane usually last only a couple of minutes, if at most. I said, but these are crisscrossed, and they spread, and they're interlacing. And so then he said, well, who's behind it? And I said, well, that's a good question. I said, this is a worldwide movement, and I said, it's really an experimentation. They're testing the military capabilities, number one. They spray the skies, and then they'll see how many people have gotten sick, how many people have died, and so then they'll extrapolate that and to make a military weapon out of that, to see if it's going to be an efficient military weapon.
So they're treating us like laboratory animals.
Exactly, just like guinea pigs. This is not the first time. I mean, it's a very sophisticated method. I mean, during the so-called American Civil War, which was really an uncivil war, the armies used to kill a sheep and then throw it down the well. And then when the invading army would come in, they would drink that water and they would all get sick. And this was the biggest cause of death among the military during the Civil War, was diseases of gastroenteritis, diarrhea, and whatnot.
So they're using this as medical experiments.
Exactly.
My name is Chief Golden Light Eagle from the Yankton Sioux Reservation, and I'm concerned, like all of you, and maybe some of you that don't know, we're concerned about our air. Our air is being polluted purposely by relatives that we might call government, might call military, might call a New World Order, from somebody that doesn't like two-legged beings, or any other form of life on Mother Earth. Because everything that you're doing to the air, you're doing to every living person on Mother Earth. It doesn't just affect us, it affects the trees, it affects life, all the chemicals that you're putting up here. It's not necessary, for the Earth takes care of its own. The universe takes care of its own. So could you please stop poisoning the air? The air belongs to everybody. Mitaku Yoasi.
Lo curioso era que algunos me mandaban un mensaje privado, algunos pilotos, algunos meteorólogos, y me decían: sí, efectivamente hay algo muy raro en esto, pero yo no puedo decirlo, yo estoy en este foro todos los días, se me van a echar encima como han hecho contigo. Porque a ver, lo primero, cuando uno descubre este tipo de cosas, lo primero que se encuentran es matar al mensajero. Es decir, tú dónde vas, conspiranoico, no sé qué, no sé cuánto, con un ataque ad hominem tremendo, ¿no? O sea, no entrar al debate en el tema en sí, sino tú estás chalado, tú te has fumado no sé qué, tú no sé cuánto, en fin, bueno, vale. Entonces, bueno, tuve la suerte de conocer a una persona que honestamente lo vio igualmente, y encima esta persona era bueno, medio española, medio alemana, y entonces dice: cuidado, que en Alemania hay mucho material de esto, porque incluso lo han presentado en el Parlamento alemán. Digo, pues vamos bien. Entonces, una investigadora tremenda, se llama Rosa, y ella abrió su propia web, visioncritica.org, una web que hizo muchísimo por el tema. Y bueno, pues ella empezó a traducir textos alemanes, empezó a buscar una información tremenda, porque por ejemplo los canadienses habían llegado a tirar globos sonda para ver de qué material estaban hechos estas estelas. Y, sorpresa desagradable, bario, aluminio, metales pesados y bacterias hidrofilizadas que cuando iban cayendo se iban despertando, digamos, y cuando llegaban aquí pues llegaban vivas, ¿no? Entonces los pilotos me decían: no, si hay una prohibición expresa de pasar por encima de las ciudades. O sea, esas líneas aéreas continuas que las hay, uno se sube en Iberia, en un avión de Iberia, y ve las líneas, ¿vale?, que hay unos pasillos aéreos, pero no cuadran, los pasillos aéreos no hacen así, y luego así en la ciudad, en fin.
Una persona que es licenciada en Biología por la Universidad de Moscú y que ha trabajado muchísimos años en empresas de primer orden como consultora de negocios, ejecutiva de ventas internacionales, habla 4 idiomas, entre ellos el ruso, y bueno, pues les presento a Soraya Lacaba.
Otro tipo de fumigación que ha sido muy reconocida ya y de hecho a veces causa cierta confusión. Yo colgué en el blog no hace mucho el vídeo de un meteorólogo norteamericano que en plena tarea, cuando él estaba dando las noticias del tiempo, dijo: estas estelas que hay aquí que están cubriendo California no son estelas ni de nieve ni de lluvia, esto es en realidad chaff, se llama en inglés. Son esos dispositivos que contienen virutas de aluminio, se disparan con esos aparatos que los aviones militares contienen. Esto es una tecnología que se puso en marcha en la Segunda Guerra Mundial, tecnología que inventaron los alemanes, y efectivamente los aviones militares en ocasiones la utilizan porque esas virutas de aluminio lo que hacen es distraer la atención del enemigo. En un momento dado no aparece el avión en el radar porque esas virutas de aluminio lo que hacen es, digamos, distraer el radar. Sigamos, más ejemplos de chemtrails reconocidos. En el 2008, California, El gobernador de ese momento, Schwarzenegger, dio vía libre a la fumigación sobre núcleos urbanos de California, concretamente en Monterrey, unas sustancias que contenían feromonas supuestamente para combatir la polilla de la manzana. Muchísimas personas, miles de personas en realidad, tuvieron que salir de sus casas porque los efectos secundarios de esas fumigaciones eran terribles. Picores, escozores, gente que cuando iba al baño a hacer pis directamente salía sangre. Miles de personas, de hecho, se unieron en plataformas para reclamar daños y perjuicios, pero esto es un tipo de fumigación que fue reconocido absolutamente y salió en todos los medios de comunicación. No hay ningún secreto. Y eso también son chemtrails, son estelas químicas. Siguiente, por favor. Otro tipo de estelas químicas que todos conocemos, la fumigación con yoduro de plata. Se utiliza desde hace muchísimo tiempo, desde hace por lo menos 50 años, para o bien crear o bien disipar las nubes que contienen lluvia. Por lo tanto, se utiliza por muchos gobiernos cuando tienen, por ejemplo, paradas militares. En el caso de Rusia, de China, por ejemplo, en esto saltó a los medios de comunicación cuando se supo que lo utilizaban en los Juegos Olímpicos para asegurarse un tiempo y una climatología perfecta. Esto es yoduro de plata. Preguntas. ¿Alguien está, me refiero a los grupos medioambientalistas, ministerios de sanidad, de medio ambiente, ¿alguien se está preocupando realmente de que todas estas sustancias químicas, porque lo son, que dañan el medio ambiente y que afectan a la salud humana, estén cayéndonos encima? Pues la respuesta es no. La respuesta es no. Otro tipo de... No, todavía no. Hay otros tipos de fumigaciones tristemente conocidas, de las que podríamos hablar largo entendido. Por ejemplo, un tipo de fumigación que se reconoció en documentos desclasificados por parte de Gran Bretaña, que hablaba de que en los años 50 se había fumigado con FP tratado con silicona. Supuestamente era una mezcla que se convertía en inocua cuando llegaba al suelo. Esto ocurrió en la ciudad de Norwich. Hubo afectados, hubo enfermos y ahora, recientemente en el 2000, se desclasificaron esos documentos. Y podríamos seguir la cuenta así un largo rato. Todo esto son chemtrails, son reconocidos sin ningún tipo de problema. ¿Son estos los chemtrails de los que hablamos cuando hablamos de chemtrails, los que, digamos, observamos el cielo? No. Digamos que para nosotros esto no representa ningún enigma, son una desgraciada realidad con la que convivimos. De hecho, son una vergüenza. Pero no son los chemtrails de los que hablamos los Skywatchers cuando hablamos de chemtrails. ¿Qué contienen? Vamos a pasar al siguiente slide. Hay que decir que como ni las asociaciones medioambientalistas se preocupan, ni los ministerios de sanidad, ni los de medio ambiente de ningún país del mundo se preocupan de esta realidad, las personas realizan test de laboratorio pagándolos de su propio bolsillo. Entonces, no tenemos ahora ninguna universidad ni ningún centro intentando poner en claro los resultados y demás. Uno tiene que bucear entre la información e intentar encontrar, bueno, datos más o menos fiables sobre los resultados de las sustancias que aparecen en diferentes test de laboratorios. No son resultados monolíticos. No en todos los test de laboratorio aparecen los mismos resultados. Pero se puede hablar de un collage, de una sopa de brujas en las que con demasiada frecuencia aparecen este tipo de sustancias. Y veremos que no son solo sustancias químicas, que en realidad deberían llamarse biochemtrails, porque no son solo químicos lo que aparecen en los resultados de los test de laboratorio. En primer lugar tenemos a la Pseudomonas aeruginosa, que es una bacteria que aparece muy a menudo en la mugre. Con lo cual podríamos pensar que las muestras las toman, bueno, pues personas interesadas de a pie que dicen: voy a poner este frasco aquí al lado de mi casa cuando llueve, voy a intentar llevarme estas muestras a un laboratorio y de esta manera hacen el asunto. No estemos imaginando aquí grandes procesos y cosas muy sofisticadas. Con lo cual uno puede pensar que esa bacteria salta, bueno, sencillamente pues porque se ha contaminado la muestra, pero resulta que la Pseudomonas aeruginosa también se utiliza con demasiada frecuencia en ingeniería genética, porque permite que la bacteria inserte paquetes genéticos, paquetes de información mediante transducción y conjugación, dos procesos, digamos que corren en paralelo, son similares pero no son lo mismo, a la célula huésped. O sea que se utiliza muy a menudo esta bacteria en ingeniería genética. Luego tenemos las sales de bario en aerosol. Bueno, las sales de bario, lo primero que tenemos que saber es que son radiactivas, es decir, si tú analizas el espectro de las sales de bario, te encuentras las sales de bario, pero a medida que pasa el tiempo, ese espectro va, por decirlo así, sacando otros elementos, otros agentes que pueden ser muy tóxicos, incluso más que el bario, que están debajo del espectro. Son sustancias muy contaminantes y son sustancias radiactivas. Se utilizaron en la, por ejemplo, guerra del desierto, en Irak, produciendo un alto índice de enfermedad, muchísimas bajas en el bando enemigo, y luego veremos que junto con el aluminio son dos sustancias que aparecen con demasiada frecuencia. Aparecen casi en todas las muestras de test de laboratorio. El etileno dibromida, que me gustaría hablar de él, porque no sé si esta mañana se ha hecho mención a esto, era una sustancia que antes se utilizaba para mezclarlo en el carburante. En 1964 la EPA, la organización, digamos, norteamericana que está pendiente de la salud medioambiental, lo prohibió. O sea, está prohibido como uso en pesticidas, como mezcla con el carburante y demás desde 1984. Sin embargo, aparece en algunas muestras. Con lo cual, la pregunta está en si los aviones militares o la aviación comercial, que parece poco probable que sea así, lo siguen utilizando porque aparecen las muestras y deja unos rastros que luego os enseñaré fotografías que se asemejan a los arcoíris, pero no lo son en absoluto. No lo son en absoluto. Son sustancias muy contaminantes, muy nocivas para la salud, producen unos trastornos enormes en el sistema nervioso central y sobre todo en el sistema respiratorio. Enterobacterias, que son, bueno, pues como la E. coli, por ejemplo, que aparece con muchísima frecuencia, puede causar trastornos a nivel intestinal y otro tipo de enfermedades como la neumonía. La Serratia marcenses, que en documentos desclasificados, además en un enlace que está disponible en el Servicio de Inteligencia canadiense, parece que se utilizó en experimentos en la ciudad de San Francisco, de los cuales además una persona al menos resultó muerta y hubo heridos y demás, o sea que la Serratia marcenses también es la favorita para muchos experimentos porque deja una marca roja en la piel que permite identificarla. Permite identificar que la muestra, por decirlo así, o que la célula huésped ha sido contaminada. Entonces se utiliza de esa manera, como marcador. Pues sí. El Streptomyces. Esto de lo que estoy hablando no son hipótesis. Esto concretamente, que acabo de hablar de San Francisco, estos son documentos desclasificados. O sea, es alucinante. El Streptomyces, que se utiliza para fabricar penicilina, una enzima empleada en laboratorios, bacterias y sustancias tóxicas de todo tipo, células rojas congeladas. No aparecen virus en las muestras porque los virus son muy difíciles de identificar en los test de laboratorio, pero por supuesto no se descarta que haya virus, de hecho es bastante probable que existan virus. Y bueno, como veis, se puede hablar de biochemtrails. Siguiente slide, por favor. Estas son formaciones de etileno dibromida que os digo que aparecen con bastante frecuencia. Yo no sé si las habéis visto, pero los que estamos ya acostumbrados a ver el cielo, pues la verdad es que aparecen, bueno, dióxido de antio también, ¿no? Por desgracia. Ahí están. Siguiente slide. Cuando se interpreta, yo he traído test de laboratorio de algunos que se han hecho en Italia, Canadá y en otras partes del mundo. No sé si vamos a tener tiempo para verlo, pero si alguno tiene interés, yo con gusto se lo mostraré. Como digo, los resultados no son monolíticos, pero si hay dos sustancias que aparecen con toda frecuencia, son el bario, en forma de sales, en forma de componente, porque el bario es un metal que pocas veces aparece solo en la naturaleza, y el aluminio. ¿Cuáles son las cantidades que se pueden considerar nocivas para la salud? Porque el bario se utiliza muchísimo en fabricación por ejemplo, en textiles, en la industria textil, en la industria del metal, en diferentes tipos de fabricación se utiliza el bario. Entonces, no podemos saber si esas muestras de bario, por decirlo así, se han contaminado del propio efecto de la industrialización o vienen de donde vienen, ¿no? Pero lo que sí sabemos es los niveles que considera la propia EPA como contaminantes o máximos recomendables para la salud. Y hablan de 2 partes por millón o de 2 miligramos por litro. Hay que tener cuidado cuando se interpreten los datos de los test, lo digo porque he visto algunos errores por ahí y tal, porque a veces no aparecen en miligramos sino en microgramos. Con lo cual nos podemos estar colando en cuanto a las conclusiones si no tenemos en cuenta bien el tema de las unidades, ¿no? El caso es que hay muchos estudios. He puesto simplemente aquí uno de muestra de Tarasenko de 1977 que se hizo con ratas, sometiéndolas a dosis, digamos, similares a estas de máximos recomendables de bario, de sales de bario por inyección. Y, bueno, Tarasenko descubrió que los efectos sobre las ratas, que por cierto son los animales que se utilizan en el laboratorio porque como mamíferos se asemejan mucho a nosotros, aunque podamos creer que no, bueno, pues encontraba que tenían presión arterial alta, niveles bajos de hemoglobina, reducción de niveles de trombocitos, reducción de nivel de azúcar, aumento de leucocitos, esclerosis peribronquial en los pulmones. Beliles siguió trabajando en este tipo de estudios, estudiando ya a humanos que estaban exponiéndose, sencillamente porque trabajaban en los procesos de fabricación, pues por ejemplo en la industria textil, a altas cantidades de bario. Y en muchísimos casos se encontró que eran personas que estaban enfermas con irritación bronquial y lo que se denomina varitosis, ¿no? Que es sencillamente una enfermedad que tiene un cuadro, podríamos hablar, muy similar al de la suma de componentes de todo lo que hay aquí. Siguiente slide. Y en el caso del aluminio, esas son las cantidades de 0,05 a 0,2 miligramos por litro, o lo que es lo mismo, 0,2 partes por millón. Esas son las cantidades que la propia EPA considera máximos recomendables. ¿Cuáles son los efectos del aluminio en la salud? Pues sobre todo y especialmente atacan al sistema nervioso central. Al sistema nervioso central y a enzimas súper importantes para nuestro cerebro, es decir, para los procesos mentales. Inhibición de enzimas importantes en el cerebro, reducción de actividad del sistema nervioso, absorción de importantes químicos por parte de células nerviosas, la dopamina y la norepinefrina, que son fundamentales para los mecanismos cerebrales, pérdida de memoria, descoordinación de los músculos, descoordinación de los movimientos, desorientación del sistema nervioso, y en casos ya de niveles de intoxicación se llegaba a observar parálisis muscular, pérdida de memoria, demencia, Alzheimer, hipoparatiroidismo, esclerosis lateral amiotrófica, anemia, disfunción de riñón, disfunción de hígado, colitis, desorden neuromuscular, Parkinson, úlceras. No me digáis que no me he quedado... Vamos, sí, o sea, la sopa de brujas es una imagen que se queda muy corta cuando tenemos en cuenta lo que puede representar para la salud humana las altas dosis de bario y las altas dosis de aluminio junto con todo lo demás. Siguiente slide. Como digo, tengo ahí los test, pero prefiero pasar a otros temas. Luego, si nos queda un poquito de tiempo, lo revisamos. Vamos a lo que creo que es la pregunta del millón, ¿no? ¿Cuáles son los objetivos? ¿No? ¿Cuáles son los objetivos o el objetivo de estos programas que, tal y como los vemos todos, son programas globales y programas de alto secreto? Porque la verdad es que me cuesta imaginar un solo programa, un solo proyecto que tenga más secretismo que este. Fijaos que estamos en una era donde se están desclasificando muchísimos documentos, donde gente como, pues que digo yo, Proyecto Camelot y demás, están entrevistando a gente y gente que ha trabajado en proyectos súper secretos y todos hablan de cosas increíbles, desde viajes en el tiempo a máquinas que en fin, que no hubiéramos ni soñado, y sin embargo no hay ni uno solo, y no me digáis que eso no tiene gracia, que hable de los chemtrails, cuando es realmente, insisto, para muchísimas personas el enigma de nuestro tiempo, porque están visibles ahí en el cielo, porque los sufrimos todos, nadie habla de ellos, nadie. Y por lo tanto los Skywatchers, las personas que han tenido una llamada a este problema, por la razón que sea, yo os cuento mi caso personal, a mí este asunto no es el que, por decirlo así, motivó mi despertar, porque mi despertar, como muchísimas personas que estáis aquí, lo inició el asunto de la salud, ¿no? Personas allegadas que enfermaban y encontraban solución a sus problemas solo mediante la salud natural, mediante la medicina natural, con lo cual eso me llevó a plantearme en qué clase de sistema de salud vivimos, cuando llegas a la conclusión de que es un sistema basado en la enfermedad, por y para la enfermedad. Y ese fue el inicio de mi despertar, pero me topé con el asunto de los chemtrails. Para las otras cuestiones de salud yo ya he encontrado una solución, y espero que todos vosotros también, pero para esto no. Y entonces los Skywatchers, que miramos este asunto desde donde estemos, desde donde estamos, con nuestras cámaras de vídeo, simplemente intentando poner en orden la información, tenemos diferentes puntos de vista. Lógico, porque los humanos no coincidimos absolutamente en nada, ¿no? Tenemos diferentes puntos de vista casi para todo. Yo respeto muchísimo a todos los Skywatchers y a sus puntos de vista, a todos, a todos. Y a mí me gustaría decir que puedo incluir a todos los puntos de vista en mi presentación y en mi forma de ver las cosas. Yo los voy a presentar, pero también os voy a dar mi visión personal sobre todo este tema, ¿no? Como digo, hay varias hipótesis formuladas por investigadores independientes. La primera la he llamado solo para esta presentación la hipótesis eugenesia. No es que sea un nombre sacado de ningún lado, lo he puesto para resumir el concepto de que efectivamente hay muchos indicadores que nos vienen a decir que eso que Jessica llamaba esta mañana los Illuminati, otros llamamos el nuevo orden mundial, otros hablamos de la élite, otros hablamos de los controladores, en términos muy genéricos, porque creemos que detrás de esos seres humanos hay otras entidades espirituales detrás. Por lo tanto, vamos a hablar de controladores. Esta hipótesis eugenesia se basa en la idea de que ellos mismos están diciendo, y además de forma bastante descarada, considero ya, que sobra población sobre el planeta. No hace mucho colgué yo un vídeo donde Bill Gates, en una conferencia, lo decía, que había demasiada la sobrepoblación, la superpoblación era el gran problema de la humanidad, que no podíamos llegar todos a ningún sitio. Y bueno, evidentemente no se lanzaba a contarnos cómo quería solucionarlo, pero os puedo decir que ya ellos plantean con toda apertura el hecho de que eso es un problema, de que no hay recursos para todo, de que estamos contaminando, ya el CO2, lo que exhalamos, ¿no?, supone un elemento de contaminación básico, según su punto de vista, es algo que ya veremos después, el climate gate, ¿no?, la teoría esta que los Carlos Campos llama de los calentólogos, que a mí me gusta mucho esa palabra. Bien, pues en esta hipótesis de eugenesia, por supuesto, tiene su fundamento, porque no podemos negar que si observamos cómo funciona el sistema de salud-enfermedad, que parece que no va orientado precisamente a nuestra salud, sino a todo lo contrario, bueno, pues podemos decir que, en fin, que puede que sea cierto, y que estén utilizando este programa de chemtrails para eliminar a personas. Lo dejo ahí. Pasa por favor. Bueno, simplemente voy a hacer un listado. La segunda hipótesis la he llamado aquí la hipótesis geoingeniería, que es la que ahora mismo está muy en boga. De hecho, en las últimas cosas que aparecen en medios de comunicación de masas, se lanza esta hipótesis como muy, digamos, favorita de las damas. Yo plantearé los problemas que veo para esta hipótesis. La hipótesis de que esto está relacionado directamente con el proyecto HAARP y Por último, hablaré de la hipótesis de la manipulación del ADN por medio de las fumigaciones.
First-time guest is Dr. Hildegard Staninger. Is that correct?
Yes, and she's talking about Morgellons. She's one of the foremost researchers on the syndrome. Dr. Hildegard Staninger is a doctor of integrative medicine and one of the leading international scientists in the field of industrial toxicology.
Wow, Dr. Staninger is also one of the few scientists actively investigating what's become known as Morgellons syndrome, and joins us tonight with some incredible findings.
Welcome, Dr. Staninger.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Thanks for joining us. Wow, what research you've done. Now, this is a first time for most of our viewers, so tell us, what exactly is this Morgellons problem?
The Morgellons problem is a syndrome, a disease that has specific things in common with all parties that are developing these symptoms. They have fibers that grow out of their body, and these fibers burn at 1,400 degrees or more, and they also have where it's either black, blue, or red, or even white fibers. They experience hair loss that is replaced by pseudo hair. They have fatigue and a number of what they call lesions, which has like a crust over it, or a pseudo skin, or some people call it a callus, where these fibers and other materials accumulate under the skin.
Doctor, we're just showing some photographs as you're speaking, and this thing is hideous. It looks really alien on the human body.
Well, it is a true foreign invader, meaning a foreign invader is something that comes into the body and is not recognized by the body and attacks the body's defense mechanism. And in this case, the materials which were identified at the end of the study, which was under Project FM, we found that it was made of a polyester, two-part polyester compound with other organic compounds, and it basically was like two plastic straws within itself.
Wow.
With a silicone head.
Okay, you had something on the website that was a golden head. What is that in relation to?
Now the golden head, which was identified in the very beginning, we went in stages. Let me just explain what the stages were. The first set of tests that were done, which were using toxicological pathology methods, which were done by a colleague of mine, Dr. Rahim Karju, and myself, and identified what was the physical nature of prepared slides that were sent to us by a person that was diagnosed with Morgellons, and also was sent to us by the hospital in New Hampshire. And that showed silicone present and also silica, crystals, okay? Mm-hmm. That was in phase 1. Phase 2 showed high-density polyethylene fiber and other compounds being present. And then phase 3, which was the combination of approximately 24 samples that were sent from around the world, and also the comparison to a chemtrail sample that was sent to us from Texas.
Wow.
And two of my patients and Dr. Spencer's patients that had Morgellons, and that showed that it matched to the chemtrail sample that was in Texas versus these other two people. One lived in Signal Hill and the other one lived in Long Beach.
So we're showing something that we learned from the website. These are fibers that came from a chemtrail sample. Now, how did that come to you? What did it look like when you saw it just with the naked eye?
Well, what it looked like was just like cotton candy,
mm-hmm.
like just white cotton candy in a bag, and then also a twig was attached. Because the person who took the sample saw it falling from the sky and was able to gather it and date it when they gathered it and put it into proper Ziploc bags.
And then you had a patient, Lily, and we're showing something that showed on the website was a fiber from, I believe, her skin. And so the composition that we saw in that previous slide from the chemtrail is the same composition as this then?
Yes, except it goes in stages. You'll see chemical analysis, which was done by scanning electron microscope techniques, which were done by Lambda Labs and MIT at Woodhull, through our other lab, Applied Consumer Services. The thing is, which is important, is that as this material ages, other compounds are shown, because these compounds that were shown as metals are transitional metals that make a battery. Thus, the compounds use the cells to make its own battery, where they have a silicone or a gel in between the cells that allow it to be like suffocated or held within. Each one of the patients that Dr. Spencer and I have seen, that if they take a hair, which we thought was real hair versus pseudo hair, where it doesn't have a core in it, because human hair has a core in it, they can put their finger next to it without even touching it, just like say maybe 2 or 3 millimeters away from the hair, and the hair will start spinning, meaning there's some kind of charge within their own body.
Wow.
And we have measured, we had a company that brought over a new machine, the ESC from Korea, and we did urine samples, and conductivity is very high in a human being if it's near 1. When they use a product called Excelospheres that's manufactured by Dearborn Technologies, they can get as high as a 3 conductivity, which is extremely high. Okay?
Doctor, this is like, we need to take a commercial break. This is like something out of a 50s science fiction movie.
Absolutely.
Our guest is Dr. Hildegard Staninger, talking about Morgellons and chemtrails.
When we left, there was we were talking about electrical conductivity, and let's go back a little bit and make sure we understand this. Right. These fibers, they are somehow electrically charged?
No, no, no. They come in nanoparticles. We didn't even go there yet.
Oh, okay.
And those particles make up what they call an array, meaning they go in a straight line and they connect. Mm-hmm. And you can see them on the early pictures, which were on like the silicone pictures. And they connect and make a fiber.
Okay, I don't think we have a picture of that, but I'll try with the one here.
Okay, but I'll review that.
Yeah.
Okay, what I was saying earlier in reference to transitional metals and the conductivity. Transitional metals are metals that make up charges, being iron, sulfur, etc., and phosphorus. But in these patients, they had high metals that were transitional, and what happens is there is a particle, which is called a nanoparticle, which connects together to make a nanoarray in some shape, usually in a straight line, and that makes into the fiber. And that was shown in earlier pictures that Dr. Carjou took, where you could see there was an association between the particles connecting together.
Okay.
Doctor, this may be a ridiculous question, but the chemical analysis of these fibers, is it earthly or is it extraterrestrial?
No, what I found was earthly, meaning when these nanoparticles come into the body, and they could become as smart dust or straight particles, what happens is it has some kind of nanoparticle which is called a nano assembler, meaning it uses body materials to make its network of fibers. It has some kind of nanoparticle which is called a nano assembler, meaning it uses body materials to make its network of fibers.
Okay.
And I compared it to, we had a sample of a meteorite, which was supposed to be from Mars, I believe, and that meteorite did not match the composition of what the fibers were. It was like someone who had Morgellons touched the meteorite and gave Morgellons to the meteorite, and the fiber, the nanoarrays used the building materials of what it was associated with, which was on that meteorite.
So it's kind of like a parasite then.
Well, it would be, if you want to call it a man-made parasite, but it has, we sent early samples and photographs to the Secretary and President of the American Society of Parasitology, and the Secretary wrote us back and said that, 1, it is not a parasite, 2, it is not eukaryotic cells, 3, it's not biological, and 4, it is man-made.
And what's the truth?
So
it is man-made, but it's not a parasite.
If you look at the results that were received from MIT and Lambda Labs, if you can imagine, I live in the Los Angeles area where there's a very famous Korean drink which is made out of boba, which is tapioca pudding, a little round tapioca balls. Anyway, they have very large straws. If you put that straw with another straw inside of it, you have the 2-part polyester resin, and just put a silicone head, which is like a Tootsie Pop, on the head of it, and that's what you have. All of those fibers that were identified, which we called fibers, which when we did a scanning electron microscope and Raman test, which was micro Raman, which we tested between 1 and 20 nanometers, it showed that it was a 2-part polyester.
All right.
So that has to be created by man somehow.
Well, it has to be because it all had uniform shape.
Right.
And it had uniform array, uniform pattern. Another thing that is new information, Dr. Carjou, who had a patient recently that was exposed to it and had like a fiber or something going on their cheek and then had it isolated. He isolated like a string, if you can imagine a straw, with pellets inside of it, which was polyester crystals, which are very much like liquid polyester crystals. That confirms the polyester that we found.
But the thing is, Doctor, that these fibers are attaching themselves and then growing in human skin. What about the number?
Let me go. They're growing in human skin, meaning they're coming out of the skin. I personally, from interviewing numerous people and also observing it, they have to make a crystal of silica or any of the other crystals go to a silicone or a gelatinous mass. It has to have a pH of 10 and 11, and a pH, the only 2 organs that have that is the intestinal tract and the kidneys. So that means that this material has to go inside the body and grow outward.
Oh man, that is really sci-fi.
So what we're seeing on the outside, these individuals that have this, it is literally ripping through their skin and tissue, and that's what they feel. And if you put a piece of steel wool or just a little wood sliver or a sand spur in your skin, that bothers you until you get it out. So if you have this all under your skin, little granules, it's very annoying.
Doctor, is that why many Morgellons victims report that they feel like there's little microscopic bugs crawling under their skin? One lady, Vera Gallagher in California, actually took a knife and tried to cut her skin open to remove what she thought were bugs under her skin.
Right. I don't know that individual, but that would explain why many people do have this effect, because this material, this nanomaterial, has an affinity for, once it comes out of those organ systems that have the high pH, which is alkaline, so it can make the gel, it goes to the peripheral nervous system, which is just underneath the skin. So it's where it's on the baby nerves, so you're going to feel everything.
Oh, those poor people. So now the other thing is these people, they have these real symptoms. They are scratching. Their skin looks...
They're real symptoms. Let me interrupt you, Kate. Meaning, we have a questionnaire that Dr. Spencer and I use. There's 167 symptoms. And when we get a patient, they're lacking only 3 of those symptoms. But all of the patients that we've seen, they continually have basically all of the symptoms.
And they are, if they go to someone else, though, these poor people, and many people who are going to be watching this tonight may have heard of this, or they may even have some kind of symptoms. They go to a regular GP. What happens to them?
Well, a lot of them get misdiagnosed. A lot of them get thought of that it's all in their mind.
Right.
Some of the ones that had, I'm going to say, good response to the medical professional were ones that went to, like, occupational physicians early on that understood a chemical reaction. And the other thing is that a lot of them are getting treated, for parasites when they don't have parasites. And sometimes these medications work with the individual or appear to be working is because these medications are made up of high metals with charges, valence charges, that interact with those transitional metals.
Oh,
so it stops the process. It appears like it's gone or appears like it's working, but it still comes back because no one has stopped the, as I call it, the assembler, wherever it set up camp and making this continually happen.
When you say assembler, that sounds like a robot or something. It's a good place to take a break.
The correct term in the literature is called nanorobot.
Perfect. We're going to leave that as we go into a commercial break, and when we come back, we'll ask you to explain. Back to the nanorobot question, our assistant producer asked, have there ever been any cases that you're aware of where infants would have been born with this? Say their mother had it or something. Have you ever dealt with?
I have not worked directly with any, but I do know that there has been some babies born with it, and this was told to me by Shoshana Allison, who's been my media person to collect all the information.
Yes.
Shame. Can you imagine being a little baby and dealing with this?
Wait, you've got something on your cheek here.
Stop it. Now, tell us about these nanorobots.
Well, nanorobots are either they can be, in this case, more like chemical made materials which have a specific function. This is very similar to what we've experienced in everyday life as memory foam in our beds. It always goes back into a certain position. With nanorobots, they go into a certain area. They're programmed to go in there, made to go into there, and only do one function or multiple functions. And in this case, make a network that is very similar to a fiber optic network.
So
within the body.
So okay, fiber optics, and you earlier said something about silicone. Now, has there ever been any relationship? I'm sure people would wonder, okay, if somebody had, like, say, silicone breast implants, could that have any bearing on this?
Yes, this could, because it could be a media to grow in. But the individuals that we have tested that had the silicone and the silica crystals, they did not have any breast implants. They did not have any type of prosthetic or anything that could be related to silicone or silica.
The subject is going to be the purpose of chemtrail aerosol. A.C. Griffith was associated with the National Security Agency. He carried a top-secret clearance, a cryptographic clearance, and in more recent times he was associated with the Central Intelligence Agency operations. He was married to a lady lawyer, judge, and his father-in-law was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Virginia. He is with us today, and we want to say thank you very much, A.C. Griffith, for joining us to talk about the purpose of chemtrail aerosol. Thank you, sir, for joining us in the Power Hour today.
Thank you, Joyce. It's indeed a pleasure to be with you today.
Well, I must tell you, I think the listeners are going to get more today than they probably imagined, given the fact that you have some information that most people do not have access to, and probably information we would just as soon not know. However, knowledge is power, and we thank you for joining us, and I know that you have listened to the Power Hour in the past and have been very supportive of the activities and providing information to the Power Hour. Let's talk just as much as you want to talk about what your past experience was all about, sir.
I spent a couple days making talking points to make a guide map of how to present this to you. It is such a big topic. It's very difficult to know where to grab it to begin. Several years ago, I got a telephone call from Mike Blair at the Spotlight newspaper in Washington, now called the American Free Press. He asked me to help work with him on the story of the white trails coming out of the airplanes. And time has gone by. I guess that was 8 or 9 years ago. We actually got inside the program. We're the only people in the world that actually got inside of that program.
When you say you got inside that program,
the aerosol program, the chemtrail program,
you're talking about information on the inside of this program.
I'm talking about actually getting inside the program at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base where it's being managed.
Wow.
And we actually got into some of the people that were dissatisfied from within the program, and they divulged a lot of the acronyms and the purpose of the program and so on. And that's the only way that anybody could ever have broken the secrecy of this program.
Okay.
We know that people have died over this program. People have been hit to keep them quiet. And we know that other things have happened to keep people in this program. One of the key people that designed the aerosol, the barium salt aerosol, was set up by people in the Reagan administration, and he's now sitting in federal penitentiary. They still go to him to ask him questions, but yet he is in the prison. That is a little unnerving, isn't it?
Yes, it is, absolutely.
That the man that designed the barium salt aerosol is sitting in a prison.
Well, it would sort of make sense. Now, before we go any further, let's just define what you believe to be the aerosol crime issue. I mean, just what is this aerosol that we're discussing? I mean, it comes out of aircraft, we believe, or we know, and that is the basis of a program that is set up to not do good to this country, but probably do harm. Now, I remember we had a couple of people on the program recently. You contacted me after that, and you said, Joyce, some of the information was accurate, some of it was inaccurate. But what we do know is there's something in the skies that should not be there.
The white trail's not coming out of the engines. It's coming out of aerosol units on the aircraft. In the very beginning, the early days, the aircraft were flying relatively low, 10,000 feet or below, and they were developing the program. They were mostly contract aircraft, mostly CIA aircraft. Now the program has been expanded, and commercial airliners have been outfitted with aerosol units that are controlled through computer systems and satellites to dispense a barium salt mixture. It's a mixture of barium salt, not coming out of the engine. It's coming out of aerosols. And we have checked on information. We do confirm that the name of the project is Project Cloverleaf in the aircraft industry. It is very secretive. It is the most secretive thing I have ever encountered. People have died over this, talking about it. I listened to your broadcast just a few minutes ago. The general was on saying that he is very patriotic and he feels compelled to speak out, and that's exactly the same way I feel. I am very patriotic. I was born before the Second World War. I'm an old guy, and I come from that generation and that mindset. This is my country, and I see my country being dissolved. My country is being destroyed right in front of my eyes, and the people are being hurt, and that's why I consented to be on your radio program today. I know you will remember that you've asked me many times to do this, and I've been very reluctant, but it's time. It's time to speak out and go public with these things.
Well, that is correct. I have asked AC to be on this program many, many times, and you do this, I think, with a considerable amount of risk to your own life, do you not?
Yes, that's right.
So there are people who have lost their lives, people who are now in prison as a result of divulging this information.
the shuttle's fuel tank. It may only be 130 miles to space, but to cover that distance, the engines will use 500,000 gallons of fuel, and that works out at 2 feet to the gallon. Despite the cost, however, NASA does need to test these engines once in a while. So they built this place in the wetlands of Mississippi. The first thing they installed was a huge loudspeaker, through which they played white noise to simulate the sound of a rocket. They then sent a number of trucks in different directions out into the wilderness, and the drivers were ordered to stop when the noise levels became acceptable. This gave them an imaginary boundary line, and anyone living on the inside of it was offered a simple choice. Stay, and you'll never hear another television program as long as you live. Or take the NASA shilling and get out. No one stayed, and NASA ended up with exactly what it wanted. 125,000 acres of nothing. They even had to move 5 cemeteries, because the noise they were planning on making would wake the dead.
Feels like it's getting close, Dylan. There went something. What is that? That feels like it's getting very close.
Don't worry if you can't hear what I'm saying. I couldn't even hear myself. This is the loudest sound you could possibly conceive. And, as it turns out, the cleanest. Now, the most amazing thing is that that cloud up there, which was generated by the engine, is just a mixture of hydrogen and oxygen. It's water vapor. And in about an hour's time, someone in Mississippi is going to get wet washing. It will actually rain. I told you. It's raining! That's unbelievable! Oh, NASA's playing God. It's making its own weather.